Alright, let's transition out of this. Turn this down to reasonable levels. Alright. Let's move over to camera 1. There we are. Let's put camera 2 in the waiting. And I think we're all set to go. Hello and welcome to Sleeving Up live streams. I am here with one of my favorites today. Sorry about that quick delay. I realized that I did not have my table readjusted after using it this weekend, so I got the camera hooked up to a whole jury rig in the ceiling. It's awful. It's just simply the worst. So it takes me a little bit to get it all set up again, but for once using the Red Gear Hulk playmat is on theme because we were going over Mono Red Reanimator, starring Feldon of the Third Path. One of my favorite generals and one of my favorite decks of all time. This is definitely a lot. This is definitely going to be a deck near and dear to my heart. I've got most of this baby foiled out, and unlike maybe some of my other decks, which I have played here and there, and I come up with the ideas, this is one that I have down pat. And I'm positive most of the choices are pretty much optimized for what I want to be doing. Obviously, you can play other things. The big inclusion is there's not going to be any of the Blood Moon. Music's still going. Yeah. I wanted that kind of in the background. I don't know. I don't know if you guys can see chat in the main window, but I don't know. I kind of like something filling a little bit of the air. Maybe I'll learn how to edit it in the background. But for now, we're gonna leave a little bit of music going while I talk, just to kind of keep my ears from blowing out from my own voice. To be honest, I'm still not used to being in a quiet room while it happens. But so this is Feldon of the Third Path. You can see him right there in the corner. I forgot to put him on the main screen. He's a 3-drop 2/3 that you can pay to. A little distracting before. Yeah, I'm still trying to figure out the balance for that. I think this level at about, I think that's like 45 decibels is fine. I don't know what the meter is, but I know where it is on the meter, and now I know it's a solid level. So he's a 3-drop 2/3, not really much to say. But you can pay 2 in a red, tap him, and put a token onto the battlefield that's a copy of target creature card in your graveyard. Except it's an artifact in addition to its other types, which is kind of important. But the big thing is it gains haste, and you sacrifice it at the beginning of the end step. That means all ETBs trigger. That means you can swing with said creature and get immediate value out of it, both damage and ETB-wise. And that also means death triggers are relevant. There aren't a lot of solid death triggers in red. I'll be honest with you. I found there isn't too many of them that I'm particularly fond of. But the ETBs is very, very nice for this kind of deck. I'm worried that I'm hitting the red and I might be too loud on here. Hopefully my voice isn't like booming into the mic. But there's a couple of generalized strategies to the cards we're using in this deck. Your main focus is going to be obviously dumping various creatures in your graveyard using a lot of the red, what do you call that? Looting effects. So you're going to be discarding first for the most part, but you're going to be drawing. Volume's all good on this end. Thank you. Thanks, Pete. So you're going to be using wheels, you're going to be using the draw and discard, and you're going to be using a couple of other various methods to fill your graveyard up with creatures. Try and ramp up a little bit because red actually has a decent amount of ramp. Plus, if you can afford the artifact, it's worth it. But red in particular gets an extra gauntlet effect. And it gets a couple of cool creatures that help it ramp, including Karn. So your main strategy is essentially playing a little bit of ramp, playing a little bit of draw and discard in the beginning of the game, looting and ramping. And then pretty much once you hit turn 4 or 5, your deck really starts going off. You're able to play the 6 drops and 7 drops. Maybe Feldon's out and you start reanimating stuff that's just not supposed to be out yet. And over the last couple of years, they've managed to give red a surprising amount of card advantage, which essentially means that you may be running out of cards less than some other decks, which is a really strange prospect to come up with. But essentially, you don't really run out as fast as your opponents most of the time. Let's see if this is working just fine. Oh. Did that wrong. There we go. Man, this will not play the live stream in real time. Oh, I have to pause it to do it? That's obnoxious. Okay. Alright, just figuring this out. Sorry about that. So, you're going to be filling up your graveyard, you're going to be ramping, and you're going to be bringing out these creatures way too fast. And one of the best parts of the deck is you do have the backup strategy in being mono red. I can't tell you how often maybe abusing your graveyard strategies and abusing ETBs just doesn't work out. Somebody plops down a Torpor Orb and a Rest in Peace, and basically everything tech-wise in your deck is ruined. You still have the backup plan of playing just enormous creatures, and the backup plan is a lot of them have fire breathing, which means fire breathing and flying, which means even if you're completely cut off from most of, like I said, your more romantic strategies, you know, the stuff that really makes the deck interesting, you can still manage to melt people's faces off with fire breathing. I have more often than not dumped like 15 into an Acroma and just murdered the blue player that's been ruining my fun. It's a beautiful feeling. There's some people aren't a fan, but there's really quite nothing like having mana directly engined into damage on your opponent. And just not enough people, there's just not enough paths in the world to stop. Maybe they'll stop your more abusive cards like Red Gear Hulk, but chances are they're not going to be able to stop everything. And you're gonna be able to, like I said, just melt their face off with like a Shivan Dragon reprint. We run several variants of Shivan Dragon in this deck, even though we don't run the namesake card, which are more than capable of just murdering a person if we're just not feeling them being alive at the moment. So I'm going to go over a couple of the quick parts. I think I want to start with just land structure in the deck for these decks. This one's pretty simple. We're running 32 mountains, and we're running 5 utility lands. We like having basic mountains because a lot of we run 3 gauntlet effects. I don't know what you'd call it, but we run Extra Planar Lens, Gauntlet of Might, or is that Power? Might, and Gauntlet of Power. Oh yeah, it's all of those. Chaos is the one that we don't run. But so we have 3 of those effects. We like having basic mountains. You're more than welcome to also run Magus of the Moon and Blood Moon. There are probably easy cuts that are a little bit more fun that you could put in more competitively, and you're likely to not even feel the fact that you did it. I run the 2 cycle lands, Forgotten Cave and Smoldering Crater. Here, let me bring it up. I'll switch over to that. Go to the lands, which we have the these two here, Smoldering Crater and Forgotten Cave, both of them cycle and draw us a new card. Excellent if we're just kind of in the late game. We have, and we just don't really need them. You know, basically every monocolor deck should be running them, and they're especially helpful in mono red. Next we have Myriad Landscape. Pretty simple. It just ramps us for 2. It's an explosive vegetation on a land, which is just absurd for monocolor decks. Next, we have Buried Ruin. Just brings us back an artifact. We don't run a lot of... I believe we only run 2 cards that count as enchantments. The rest of them are sorceries for the most part, and there's a couple of instants. So most of our utility cards are retrievable with Buried Ruin, at least the most important ones. And it's always nice to bring back a Gauntlet of Might that somebody thought they blew up. And it doesn't really affect you because you weren't getting anything off of it anyways. And last but not least, definitely not least, is Valakut the Molten Pinnacle. Should be in every mono red deck. We got it right here. And just battlefield tapped. And when a mountain ETB is under your control, if you control at least 5 other mountains, you may start bolting targets for each mountain that enters. Between this, the Myriad Landscape, as mentioned before, but mostly this little buddy here, Burnished Heart, I can bring him up right here. We're more than capable. He just explosive veggies on a creature that we can bring back over and over. We can actually kill people without using combat damage by using Valakut. I've done it more often than you'd think. just kind of finishing people off by bringing in like 4 mountains at the end of their turn, by sacrificing said Burnished Heart and Feldon, and bringing it back with Feldon again. Pay the 12 mana or 15 mana or whatever, and just boom, do 12 damage to somebody at the end step is really funny. And it, like I said, it comes up a little bit more often than you'd think for sure. Especially if we can double the effects and all that. It's a really solid card and definitely worth taking up a mountain slot. Let's go back over to camera here. And boom, so good. Okay. And so now that we got the lands out of the way, which I definitely want to do first, we come up to one of the biggest reasons to run a red Reanimator deck. Not just because Feldon is really good, but because you have a backup plan that most Reanimator decks don't have, which is Fire Breathing. We run Skyship Stalker, Scourge of Valakut, Molten Steel Dragon, Inferno Titan, Moonveil Dragon, Akroma, and Dragon Tyrant as specifically fire breathers that are just mostly used to hit our opponent. They're the Shivan Dragon, kind of like spin-offs. The most important being Dragon Tyrant. He's a flying trample 6/6 double strike that at the beginning of your upkeep you have to sacrifice him unless you pay 4 red, but we don't generally pay that. Most of the time, we just bring him back with Feldon. He bring him back for just 3 mana, and we have more than enough to dump a boatload into him. Most often, at least in the 12 to 15 range, into his fire breathing ability. And here, let me move this over. And then after that, we're just dealing upwards to, we can easily deal just under 40 damage to an opponent in 1 turn, and just take him out with just a Dragon Tyrant, and have him still in our graveyard and available for the next turn, because Feldon does not make the creature exile itself. You can just keep doing it over and over. It's excellent. Akroma right here. Akroma right here just can't be counted as protection from white and blue. That's kind of really relevant. A lot of times, I just end up morphing her turn 3 for shits and giggles, and you can still flip her up later. But for the most part, it's really just the pro white and blue. She can't really be exiled by a lot of the white spells, and then the blue players just pick up their cards to this chick. They literally can't do anything about it most of the time. and you can just really pick on them with Acroma. Blue doesn't really get a lot of interaction with the graveyard, and countering the Acroma they can't counter the Acroma, and it's really hard to counter the ability. So you're just looking at just an enormous monster coming after their face. This is really important, and you kind of have to play it in the deck, because those white and blue decks will pick on you by exiling your creatures, or just, blue players pick on everybody. Moonveil Dragon can buff the team. Doesn't come up very often, but it's still worth running the variant. I believe he's right here. We have Inferno Titan. This is recently spiked up. I'm glad I got a foil recently. Got a foil before it did. But he just ETBs and divides up 3 damage. Most of the time, that doesn't necessarily matter. But it also happens when he attacks. So you're looking at 2 Arc Lightnings, or Flames of the Firebrand, whatever you want to call it. Essentially just two instances of that ability coming at somebody. And a lot of the time, that's more than enough to pick off 2 or 3 creatures, or just deal 6 directly to your opponent. Playing him outright isn't great a lot of the time, but abusing him with Feldon is certainly fun, especially since, again, he has the haste. Next up, we've got probably 2 of the more boring variants. We have Skyship Soccer, which I run just because I really like how quickly he comes out. Let me bring him over. He's right here. He can give himself Fire Breathing, give himself First Strike, which is actually one of the more relevant things. It essentially means he can't be blocked. In EDH, opponents don't generally have very, let's say, forgettable or not forgettable, expendable large flyers that would be able to block him, and giving him First Strike just means you're eating it for free for the most part. And he can also give himself Haste, which means he can be a 5-drop 3/3 flying haste, which can be relevant. He's just very, very versatile in what he does, especially for the Shivan Dragon variant. And I just like that you can start swinging turn, probably 3 or 4 with a 5/5 in the air, and really start taking opponents down a peg early. Scourge of the Valakut is the other one. We don't often bring back a lot of dragons. Or we don't often really use the Dragon ETB that's on the card. It's a lot of text, but essentially just it's very well known in the Dragon EDH decks for just killing people outright. But in this deck, we're essentially using him just to beat face. But it can become relevant sometimes. Using Feldon's ability before the beginning of the end step of the turn before yours. So one thing you can do with Feldon, and this is a little hard to explain, is you can pay 3 mana, right, and create a token of the creature before the beginning of the end step, or during the end step of the player before you's turn, and you'll actually still have that token during your turn. So you can essentially make a Scourge of the Valakut before the end of their turn, start your turn, make another Scourge of the Valakut, and now you're getting 2 instances, I believe. No, you're just dealing 2 damage. But, oh no. Yeah. So you would be doing 2 instances of 2 split up, which is pretty nice. But then again, if you play another dragon, or if you bring another one back, or if you copy it, it can start to stack up. But it's probably the weakest of the bunch, but I still haven't found one that quite replaces it. I'm sure they will eventually. And one of the most powerful of the bunch, besides Tyrant and Acroma, is Molten Steel Dragon. I fucking love this card. It's not all that exciting. It just pays life. It can pay life or red for Fire Breathing. But the implications become way better when we actually have a couple of ways to gain a massive amount of life in this deck with Luxon Warhammer or Wormcoil Engine, and using various effects that are in this deck. A lot of the times we'll blow an entire board of damage using the creature's power, and the card specifically says the creature deals the damage. So so we have an effect that can... We have ways of gaining a massive amount of life, and even still, it's very nice to be able to pay a large amount of mana and then kind of top off the edge to kill somebody with the life. Not to mention he can come out for just 4 mana and no red, which means if you've gotten a large amount of colorless ramp, you can just kind of plop him out. I'm just a huge fan of the card. I love paying life for just about anything, and direct damage to my opponent's face is certainly something I'm a fan of. 2 other just kind of beaters that don't really fit in any other kind of category are Wormcoil Engine, which just has Death Touch and Lifelink. It's just a really solid card, and oftentimes we need the Lifelink more than anything else. But also the Wormcoil Engine, when it dies, you create the other 2 worms, and Feldon doesn't exile, he sacrifices. So you'll get those worms, and then you'll be able to do it again. So very abusable. It's one of the only death triggers that are particularly potent in this deck. But we're capable of gaining quite a bit of life off of just one Wormcoil coming out with Feldon. And next is Emrakul the Promise End, jokingly referred to as the biggest dragon in Magic, because there actually isn't a bigger one. She is actually the biggest dragon. She costs 1 less for each card type among cards in your graveyard, which isn't that hard to hit in this deck. You're not likely going to hit enchantments or planeswalkers, or instants all at once, but generally about one of them you'll have an artifact, you'll have a creature, and you'll most likely have a land from discard, and definitely a sorcery. So taking off 5, she's most of the time an 8/8. A lot of the time playing this deck. And then when you cast her, you gain control of target opponent during his or her next turn, and then they gain an extra turn. Unlike Standard, a lot of the time the extra turn doesn't really matter for the EDH player. Most of the time you have more than enough at your disposal to kill somebody else and then destroy their own board. And if you don't, at least you can pick the player that you know won't be able to kind of fuck you in the extra turn. But just them drawing a card really doesn't matter. And so even if you just draw a card and just pass, because I believe you have to gain control of target players. So you can all likely just draw them a card for playing an 8-drop 13/13 flying trample protection from instants, which is more than enough of a drawback to appear fair. But for the most part, we're just dumping her in her graveyard and just bringing her back and swinging for 13. She's enormous. She's really fucking hard to kill. Having protection from instants, which is most of the spot removal in the format. And Wrathing doesn't really get rid of her. She's a token. So they kind of have to react on the spot, or else they're taking 13 damage all of a sudden. It's pretty easy to break up a lot of defenses with her. So we leave her in here. Even though we don't get a lot. I've gotten some sick stuff out of the extra turn, but a lot of the time she really is just a 13/13. Just enormous. There's really not much else to say. Next, we have some of the other utility cards that are in the deck that aren't quite just beaters. These are the ones that have effects that really help us out throughout the rest of the game. We have, starting off the list, we have Combat Celebrant. And let me bring that over. Combat Celebrant is a 4/1 that 3-drop 4/1 that if it hasn't been exerted this turn, you may exert it as it attacks, which means it won't untap during your next untap step. It'll kind of stay stagnant for a turn. When you do, untap all other creatures you control, so not even just the ones that attack, and then there's an additional combat phase. This is essentially an extra combat phase for 3 mana during the next turn. And with Feldon, it's even more absurd because the token has not been exerted, obviously, it just came to life. And then you can untap Feldon and use him again. Famously, this card is mostly used in conjunction with, we do have Kiki-Jiki in the deck, which I'll be talking about later. I don't think he really needs an introduction, but if you need it, this deck has the backup plan of going infinite with Combat Celebrant and Kiki-Jiki. You don't have to care about whether the Celebrant dies or not. Kiki-Jiki will untap and just be able to make another one from the first one. and you'll win on the spot with infinite combat. You'll win on the spot with infinite combat and infinite 4/1s coming their way. Obviously, there are some ways to... It's not as reliable as maybe the... some of the blue parts of the combo. But, because you do have to go into the combat to untap everything. So, with just them alone, you are only swinging with a 4/1 every turn. But unless your opponent has a creature that can't die, they can't block forever, and you'll most likely win. So that card's it's just sick anyways. Even just untapping Feldon and getting an extra combat phase, like I said, with things like Emrakul and shit, you're more than capable of just murdering people with so much damage. Keep in mind that the fire breathing stays until the end of the turn, so that when they thought they were only taking the first chunk of fire breathing and they start taking the second from the extra combat phase, it's really juicy. Next we have Dualcaster Mage. Not a lot to say, just ETBs and copies and instant and sorcery. Comes in handy a lot. Mostly just, you know, fucking around with our opponent's stuff. And sometimes copying our own. It's pretty relevant to copy a lot of the looting effect instants and sorceries. So we do have some utility with our own cards, which would make Dualcaster Mage have the list. Again, we have Kiki here is next. No introduction, but if you're not aware, he just makes a copy of a non-legendary creature, gives it haste, and sacrifices it at the beginning of the end step. He essentially does what Feldon does, but on the battlefield and for free. And he has haste himself, so you can immediately use it. He's disgusting. He goes infinite with so many things it's not even worth going into. It's almost too easy to infinite combo with him. But in this deck, it's just disgusting. Copying ETBs for free and using them over and over. Allowing us to copy a creature we have on the battlefield with Feldon. We can actually make a copy of Kiki so we can copy a creature that's maybe not in our graveyard but on the battlefield as well. Adding a really weird and corner case feeling of utility to him. Next, we have Eltai, the Primal Storm. This guy's really fun. He's a new addition. He's one of those cards you could probably cut for something like Magus of the Moon pretty easily. Just in case you're not really a fan of him. Let's look at that real quick. He's a 6-drop 6/6. When he attacks, exile the top card of each player's library, and then you may cast any number of non-land cards without paying their mana cost. He essentially just storms off the top of everybody's library, which is just insane. Cast them for free. You'll oftentimes hit or miss on a lot of people, but it's just a lot of fun, especially if you get it right. And since our deck is Reanimator, a lot of times we're really not paying the full cost of 6 to bring him back. A lot of times it's more like we're just paying 3 and attacking with him and just seeing what happens for 3 mana. It's kind of like a backup. it's kind of just like a fun little gamble, and I'm always a fan of those in my deck. Next is Molten Primordial. Pretty easy to figure out why he's in here. He's one of the few creatures that doesn't suck when he ETBs and steals a creature. There's also Conquering Manticore, and I believe a different one that steals a creature until end of turn. But the Primordials were all broken. Were all absurdly powerful for just so many reasons. But just mostly being really, really powerful for the small mana investment and just scaling up with the rest of your opponents. But he has haste. He's a 6/4. When he enters the battlefield, for each opponent, you gain control of one of those creatures. You untap them, and they gain haste until end of turn. It's just excellent. It's a great way to take out blockers, take out relevant, snag some relevant creatures. We don't have a lot of sacrifice effects, so unfortunately they're probably getting those creatures back. But it's a great way to kind of pick on one person as well. Bring a whole bunch of creatures to go against them. And that's it for creatures in this pile. Next we have Lightning Greaves. One of the most played cards in EDH for a reason. I won't go too deep into it, but it gives a creature haste and shroud. Just absurd with Feldon, absurd with Kiki Jiki, and just good with all of our beaters, all of our relevant creatures. Shroud isn't that much of a drawback against our deck. We're not often targeting our own creatures, so it really doesn't matter. It's just good. It just gives one creature a turn haste. Next we have Illusionist Bracers. Two reasons why this card is sick. One, with Feldon, we're just going to get 2 copies of a creature from our graveyard, which most of the time, if we can get this together, is more than enough to start accelerating us into an insane rate of power. like it just, I don't know what I'm trying to say there. It's just, it's so fucking good. The only thing that doesn't work well with is legendary creatures. We can't get 2 copies of them. Luckily, a lot of our creatures aren't legendary, but there's just nothing quite like bringing back 2 Wormcoil Engines or bringing back 2 Dragon Tyrants and just knocking somebody out, or gaining an absurd amount of life and then being left with all those tokens. The other relevant thing is we can equip it for 3, and then if we start paying Fire Breathing, those abilities also copy. When you start getting your mana into the 10s and up, into the double digits, this becomes absurdly powerful. Essentially converting all of your mana into double for Fire Breathing alone on that creature. And with Moonveil Dragon or Dragon Tyrant, again, this is more than capable of just outright knocking a person off the map. It's just so much damage. And it's really fucking good. There's another creature it's really solid with in here. A lot of them aren't activated abilities, but a couple of them are. Let me see if I can find the one in particular that's really fun to do with this. I'm trying to remember what it is. I think it was just... Yeah, I think it was just... Molten Steel Dragon. It turns your life paid into a direct 1-for-1 amount of life, amount of damage. It essentially becomes hatred, which is awesome. Next, we have Luxana Warhammer. It's the noob stick. It just gives them lifelink, trample, +3/+L. Trample's really important with fire breathers. Tramper's really important with a lot of big power creatures that can't quite smash through. A lot of our creatures have flying, which means blockers aren't very relevant. But it's still nice to have trample for some of the ones on the ground. And a lot of our creatures deal damage when they either ETB or do their removal attacks, which we have quite a bit here. Equipping the lifelink before they're able to do it is pretty nice. But for the most part, it's really just keeping us in a game that may have turned on us when we started swinging for 5, turn 3 or turn 4 or something. So it's nice to be able to bring yourself back some way. Next we have Sculpting Steel. Just in a deck with, like, look at this. Look at this. We have a pretty big amount of artifacts. I believe this is 17... No, I'm bad at math. Oh, no, I'm not. 17 artifacts to copy, not to mention several artifact creatures. Sculpting Steel is just good. Even just copying any given... I made sure that copying just about any given rock in this deck is also kind of relevant. The big thing is hitting one of those mana doublers. Maybe not extra planar lens, but the other two. The Gauntlet of Power and Gauntlet of Might are both incredibly relevant targets. Launches us into an absurd amount of mana. And really kickstarts the fun a lot quicker. Sculpting Steel has just so many targets, it's worth running. Next is possibly the second most fun card in the deck, is that isn't a giant fire-breathing dragon, is Rings of Brighthearth. Whenever you activate an ability, if it isn't a mana ability, you can pay 2. If you do copy that ability, you may choose new targets. This unfortunately doesn't work great with fire breathing, but it works excellent with just about anything else we're doing. It works great with Feldon, especially. It works with any of the... We run actually 3 Planeswalkers in main deck, even in mono red, which they're good with. It's great with Burnished Heart. It's good with a couple of like the Mind Stones. Great with Koth. Keep in mind that with Koth, let me show you here. One thing that you can do with Koth of the Hammer that a lot of people don't know is activating this ability is not a mana ability, because for whatever reason Planeswalkers don't make mana or don't use mana abilities even if they produce mana. So you can actually copy this. You can actually minus him and then pay 2 and get double the amount of red mana equal to your mana pool. Not to mention copying any of these Planeswalkers abilities is pretty fucking awesome. Except for maybe Tybalt, we'll go over that later. Just ignore him for now. Don't get mad at me. It's just a lot of fun to run in this deck. It's mostly good with Feldon, but there's a couple of other relevant targets to deal with. Copying with Kiki Jiki is also nice. Copying Magus of the Wheel and copying Magus of the Wheel, Codex Shredder. Basically getting any kind of advantage we can out of some of the cards that we do play. It can also copy all of our utility lands abilities except for Valakut. So it's a pretty nice backup plan. Or it's a pretty nice little utility card that goes great with Feldon. And you know, even if you're not using Feldon, there's at least other abilities. I tried, since I'm in mono red, you kind of have to really strike a balance between what's going to actively perform for you and what's going to just kind of fail outright. You kind of can't put in this isn't the kind of deck where you can put in a card that only works well with Feldon. You kind of have to make sure it does well with everything else. Like I wanted to put in Crucible because I use a lot of draw and discard effects, but it just wasn't relevant enough to pick up an extra card. Even though it's pretty easy to abuse in this deck, there just isn't the room for it. At least I'd cut fun for it, and that's not really worth it. The list is pretty tight. This is pretty tight for me, but it's definitely worth mentioning that you should make sure that you're getting something out of each card, because you kind of don't get to draw like 50 cards and just pick and choose. Everything has to at least do something. Next is Hammer Porphyros. I believe it's in the artifact page on here, even though I consider it more an enchantment. It gives all creatures you control have haste. The second ability is, I guess, fun to have. I've never used it before, but I've definitely always used creatures I control have haste. This is the only effect. We don't run Fervor and other things, just because the deck only really needs one of those effects alongside Lightning Greaves. We really didn't need 3 of that effect, so this is the best one. It's also really cool and beautiful in foil, so I like it. And last but not least on the list of cards that just kind of help us out is Gratuitous Violence, which is one of 2 or 1 enchantment besides the hammer in this deck. It's if a creature you control would deal damage, not just combat, not just non-combat, it's both, just any given damage to a creature or player, it deals double instead. A lot of our creatures deal damage, like I said, in the removal package, which I'll go over next, right here. And also, it just kind of gives our creatures quasi-double strike. All of our fire breathing gets better, but mostly just a lot of our ETBs and attacks on damage just get really pumped up. And we're also kind of paying a lot less for a... It's either Gratuitous Violence or Rage Reflection, and I think I know which one I'd rather run any day. The first strike capabilities of blocking aren't nearly worth the added benefit of having your creature deal double the damage, which we'll now go over why that's so good. Starting with the removal creatures, we've got, I'll go over, actually, let's just keep it here. First on the list is the newest edition. We've got Glorybringer here. I was on the fence about him, but he has proved absurd. Just having a flying haste 4/4 for 5 is not bad, but not only that, you can pick off utility creatures with ease. Whenever he attacks, you may exert it. If you do, you're going to deal 4 damage to a non-dragon creature. Watch out for non-dragon. Everybody forgets that, including yourself. But you're gonna zap a creature for 4 when he attacks and exerts. Fun part is that bringing him back with Feldon, we really don't care about exert, and it still almost works like an ETB because it's on attack, which is just fine with us. Our creatures all have haste, so it doesn't really matter. Or he had haste anyways. This card is nuts. I cannot believe they printed it. Just absurd. Next is Duplicant. Every red deck should be running it anyways. It's a 6-drop 4/2, but that almost never matters. Imprints, when it enters battlefield, you exile another creature, and essentially it becomes a plain copy of that creature with only its creature types and the power and toughness on the card. Not at the time, just on the card. So it's essentially a Phyrexian Devourer, I think it is. And it's just really good. It's copyable with Sculpting Steel, and we can just bring it back over and over and over to exile creatures. It's a really fun time. And not much else to say about that. It really just kind of gets rid of problem creatures for us. Steel Hellkite is next. It's an absurdly powerful dragon. 6-drop, 5/5 flying. You can Fire Breathe it, but that's not the you can Fire Breathe it for 2 colors. But the relevant part is when it hits a player, you may pay X. Then you can destroy each non-land permanent with converted mana cost X that was dealt damage by Steel Hellkite. You can only do it once, so you can't just go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and just kill their whole board. But you can... but you can just destroy everything. I mean, it hits Planeswalkers, it hits enchantments, which allows us to kill enchantments. Really important. It just kind of allows us to snipe the most problem permanent on their board that isn't a land while being in red still, which is awesome. Oftentimes, it's just paying 3 and X with Feldon to just kind of snipe out a permanent, which is just great. Huge fan of the card. And plus, it's a dragon, which is somewhat relevant. It's also an artifact, which is also somewhat relevant. Oh my god, Sculpting Steel. I forgot why Sculpting Steel is disgusting, because Feldon makes artifact copies of the token. I was trying to think, I was like, wow, it doesn't seem that great when I'm talking about it. But actually, no, Feldon makes artifact copies. So you can bring back Imrockwool and then play Sculpting Steel and essentially cheat out a real version of her or any other creature for just 6 mana total. It's a beautiful thing that I've done more often than not. I've brought back Imrockwool, swung with it at somebody, and then just made like a copy of it at the end of the turn and just let the token die. It's great. Or just made way too many copies of something like of just like Balefire Dragon or something, and just, you know, really ripped my opponents to shreds with it. Sculpting Steel is nuts in this deck. Allow me to just go back on that real quick. Next is Spawnathraxis. Not a lot to say about this guy. Where is he? How come I can't read? Help me. Oh, he's right here. He's just a 7-drop 5/5. When he ETBs, deals damage equal to the number of mountains you control. Oftentimes, this is at least 5. Not bad. An ETB deal 5 damage isn't terrible. Bringing him back multiple times, and especially late in the game when maybe you have like 10 or 11, is more than capable of killing somebody. Bringing it back, you know, a couple of times will probably just finish them off. And with cards like Gratuitous Violence, you're going to be dealing a lot of damage on ETB. Next is one of my favorite cards of all time, one of my favorite dragons, and just I include it in basically all my decks. Balefire Dragon. A 7-drop 6/6 that deals, whenever it deals combat damage to a player, it blasts each creature that player controls for that much damage. Fucking hilarious with, again, gratuitous violence, because that does double it both times. He'll deal 12 to your opponent and then 24 to each one of the creatures. It's absolutely disgusting. It's beautiful art, and the foil copy looks even better. Just had to brag about that for a second. It's just an excellent card, and they're expensive now, but someday they'll reprint him. I believe he's, you know, it's a... oh, why am I on Grabby? That's weird. I want to see what his price is. He's probably something like 15 bucks still, which is unfortunate because I think more people would have a lot of fun with them. And dragons should never be expensive. They're a bad tribe, or they were supposed to be until Wizards started making them good again. But yeah, he's disgusting. A lot of fun. More than capable of board wiping people over and over and over and never letting them recover. My favorite is going up against some of the tribal decks that just don't have flyers. And they essentially never recover from the first blast. The first blast kills their whole team. And hold on real quick. Let me just make sure my stream is working. I get so nervous. Oh, God. Am I on a... Oh, okay, never mind. There's just no way I'm going to be able to catch up with that. I thought I could watch my live stream on my phone so I could make sure it was working, but I'm essentially just in the dark on this. like I get to just really hope that it's still playing correctly. Let me just subside some of my anxiety here. Let's switch over to my camera. Hey, what's up, guys? And just open this up real quick and make sure that I'm not talking into the void. Oh wait, I have a live feed of my viewers, don't I? 4 people should be watching, and now if it's 5, let's see if it's moving. And I think it's fine. Yeah, never mind. It's just delayed a second. There we go. Okay, I'm good. Sorry about that. I get so fucking nervous about that. Let's switch back over to the cards and get back on track. Next couple are just instances sorceries. They're not really all that crazy. We have Comet Storm. This is just a fireball on crack. Let's go over to it. One of the few instances in our deck, we only run 3, and they're actually all in a row here. Comet Storm is multi-kicker 1, and then you deal X damage to each creature, or to target creature or player, to a target. Now it hits planeswalkers as well, specifically. But you deal damage to any target, and then for each time you kick it, it can also deal that much damage. When you're up in the 30s on mana, which isn't out of the realm of possibility, you just pay 2 red and like another 2, and you kill all 3 of your opponents by dealing like 26 damage to them. It's beautiful. And in a pinch, it's more than capable of killing a creature that's maybe coming after you. You can kind of leave all your mana open and just take out what you need to. I found it's really helpful for... Ooh, it's all good over here. Yeah, thanks, Pete. I get so anxious about it. I wish there was a way to keep track of it, but I do have that now. So Comet Storm's a great card. It's the best version of... It's still the best version of a Fireball variant for EDH that they've ever printed, and I don't think they're ever going to make a better one. But Jaya's Emulating Inferno becomes close, and I've thought about running it in the stack, but it just doesn't quite catch up. We have to have a legendary creature or a planeswalker in order to use it, and I just really don't like having that card stuck in my hand. Maybe one day I add it, especially since the foil probably look gorgeous, and I almost won't care if I ever come across one. But it's a very risky card, so I'm not an enormous fan of it. But probably someday. It's the closest thing to Comet Storm, and still, frankly, just not as good. But one day we'll get one. Next is Chaos Warp. Everybody knows this card. You take any permanent, shuffle it into that player's library, reveal the top card, and hope it's not something better than what you shuffled away. Or in our case, A lot of times, we just hit a creature that was going to exile anyways, right here. We hit a creature that was going to exile anyways, or I've often turns just before the end of your turn, hit a land, let's see what happens. And most of the time, you'll just hit another land. But if you take the right gamble, I've hit some pretty funny stuff right off the top. I love Chaos Warp. It's a fun card, and I like that it can also work really well on yourself in this deck. It's not just defensive. Next is Arc Bond. This is a card nobody fucking runs and is ever ready for, but I think it is absolutely hilarious. It's a 3-drop instant. You choose target creature. Whenever that creature is dealt damage this turn, the creature chosen then deals that much damage it was dealt to each other creature and each other player. I'd have to read the Oracle, but I don't believe it hits Planeswalkers. I guarantee you it doesn't hit Planeswalkers. But you're more than capable of just blowing an entire board. You attack with a whole bunch of it. You attack with one of your huge creatures. You force them to block. And then you just pick one of their creatures to just suddenly blast all that damage to everybody. It's just it's a red wrath that's instant speed and just a lot of fun to use. But this is why we also run lifelink. It's more than capable of gaining an absurd amount of life off of a Worm Coil engine or off of a creature equipped with Luxon Warhammer. Last but not least are 2 of our other sorceries here. We have Chandra's Ignition. It's basically an Arc Bond that we just set off ourselves. Target creature you control deals damage equal to its power to each other creature and each opponent. You're not going to zap yourself, and you're going to blast the whole rest of the board. Pretty worthy cause to use with a creature brought back with Feldon. Even if you end up killing Feldon yourself, it's not like you can't recast him, and oftentimes just give him haste anyways. But, again, an excellent card to pick Worm Coil Engine with, or Emrakul. Just killing everything is just, it just does an insane amount of damage. And then, again, last but not least is Blasphemous Act. The Red Wrath of God is still good in this deck. We tend to run pretty, what do you call it? This is a pretty exalted deck. Most of the time we're attacking with probably just 1 or 2 creatures. It's oftentimes we're not attacking with a bunch. That's why Moonveil Dragon isn't as great as it looks on face value, but, you know, obviously still having fire breathing is nice. But we often don't run a lot of creatures, and if somebody gets out of control, we don't mind using a Blasphemous Act to get rid of them. So, we're getting close to an hour here. I don't generally tend to like to go too far over that. And our next 2 strategies are pretty straightforward. So I'm going to switch back to the camera here. Open up chat. Okay, no one new. Go over to camera 2 so you can see my arm. Awesome. And so what we have next are the last 2 kind of like piles of cards. Ramp and Card Advantage. There's actually a large chunk of looting and card advantage strategies in red. We kind of need to set ourselves up. The good part about this deck is, unlike some of the aggro decks in the format, the looting isn't just to keep our cards relevant and try and amass some kind of card quality over the other colors, but it also sets up our game. So spending turn 2 to play like Tormenting Voice just to get a couple cards in your graveyard isn't the end of the world, and using it late game isn't the end of the world either. Oftentimes you'll find yourself picking up too many lands, and it's pretty easy to pick and choose what you need to get rid of. So this is a pretty cool deck to have a lot of these cards in, so we run almost all of them. I'm going to go over them real quick. One of the funner ones that recently got printed was Magus of the Wheel. It's a Wheel of Fortune that's on a 3-drop 3/3 that does not exile. It's pay 2 to sacrifice it, tap and sacrifice it, and each person Wheel of Fortunes discards their hand and draws 7 cards. Best part about this is we can do it instant speed in the graveyard with Feldon. Bring it back, pay 2, so pay 5 total, instant speed Wheel of Fortune. So we can do it before the end of someone's turn and draw on our turn with 7 new cards. And negate the whole problem that Wheel of Fortune has, being sorcery speed and taking up your mana. It's also just an obscene card. I love it. Hoarding Dragon. This guy just fetches an artifact, and when he dies, you get it. Great with Feldon because it's when he dies, so you're just going to grab an artifact from your deck, and then when he dies, you're just going to get it. So you can almost just pay 3 to search for an artifact off turn. It's a great card. Combustible Gearhulk. I'm going to bring this guy up because I just fucking love him, and he's actually my playmat here. He's one of my favorite creatures of all time. I said it was Balefire Dragon, but now it's definitely Gearhulk. Let's bring up this bad boy. He should come up pretty quickly. There he is, and his beautiful masterpiece version. When he enters the battlefield, target opponent may have you draw 3 cards. If they don't, you mill 3 cards and then zap them equal to the converted mana cost of those cards. So much fucking fun. We have cards like Emrakul and Dragon Tyrant and Blasphemous Act, just these absurdly high converted mana cost creatures, where sometimes your opponent will think twice before just letting you draw 3 cards in a mono red deck. It is really funny watching somebody that's kind of stressed out about it. The best part is you can pick a person. You can keep picking on the same dude, and eventually just let you draw as many cards as you want, which, unlike in Standard, is more than capable of being just an absurd wall of card advantage. Whereas, like, maybe in Standard, you'd get stuck with a whole bunch of cards and wouldn't be a relevant target. But he's also a 6/6 with First Strike. Just so much fun. Play this card, please. It's deal with it. you keep getting picked over and over, and you just gotta deal with it. And more often than not, if they choose the mill, they're gonna take at least like 14 damage. I've seen plenty of land 7-drop, boom, 14 damage. There you go, buddy. And then you just bring him back again with Feldon, pick him again. It's just like, you gonna pick mill this time, buddy? Like, my favorite is when you mill something that's even worse for him. Like, Combustible Gearhulk wasn't bad enough coming out. Then you mill 3, and now you've hit the Balefire Dragon that you can use with Feldon to just wipe their board. And it's just it's one of the few Punisher cards that just puts a smile on your face. They're not always picking the best choice. It's almost never the right choice in this deck. So it's a great Punisher card. Sandstone Oracle just picks an opponent. If they have more cards than you, you draw to the difference. Great for refilling your hand. Nullspine Dragon. When it comes into play, you may pitch your hand and draw equal to the amount of damage you've dealt to an opponent this turn. Just a great way, again, to refill your hand out of nowhere, especially with Feldon. Best part is that you don't have to deal damage. It's just target opponent. So someone else can swing at somebody for like 6. You tap Feldon, bring back a Nullspine Dragon, draw 6 cards. Boom, done. Dragon Mage, he Wheel Fortunes when he connects, 7-drop, 5/5. Bam, hit him, discard, everyone discards a hand, draw 7. Codex Shredder is a great little tool in this deck to taps to mill you every turn, and then when you're done with it, you can pay 5, sacrifice it, and return any card from your graveyard back to your hand. Great for getting back a couple of, great for kind of pulling back something real key to you at the moment. Faithless Looting, just draw 2, discard 2, and can be played again. Gamble, this card's a lot of fun, and it's a lot cheaper now. Search your library for any card, shuffle it, and then discard a card at random. Maybe it's the card you need. Most of the time, you just grab something like, I love grabbing Gearhulk, because I don't care if he's in my hand or my graveyard. It almost doesn't matter. As long as you don't have something particularly serious in your hand, Gamble's a great way to quasi-entomb, especially when you have no cards in hand. It's not the worst. Gamble alone is basically entomb, and that's great with our general. Tormenting Voice, pitch a card, draw 2 cards. Karthik Union, pitch 2 cards, draw 3 cards. I can't believe they're printing variants of this at this pace. Wild Guess, pitch a card, draw 2 cards. I'll go over Tybalt later. Sword of Fire and Ice, the best sword in the game. It draws you an extra card, which is excellent. It picks on utility creatures, which is great. But also it wrecks the blue player, which is always fun with mono red. You want to be able to fuck them up. Next is Wheel of Fortune. You'll notice this is the Judge promo, which I got. So excited. I love it so much. But each player did the one that started it all. Each player pitches their hand and draws 7 new cards. You're just taking a wild gamble that your opponents don't draw great and you draw awesome. I have definitely kept opening hands with just 3 lands, a whole bunch of garbage I can't use, in a Wheel of Fortune. It's been like, I'll keep it. And then just turn 3, just throw out a wheel and just see what happens. Oftentimes, your deck is way better equipped to have a bad Wheel of Fortune than your opponent's. Pirate's Pillage is the newest Tormenting Voice variant. If anyone's played with the newest treasures from Ixalan, it is a 4-drop that you discard a card, you draw 2, and then you also create yourself 2 treasures. In a deck like this, having 2 additional treasures on turn 4, going into turn 5, you're able to start dropping a lot of the 7 drops. So Pirate's Pillage kind of loots you and then immediately sets you up for the end game. Or at least some of the more end game cards in this deck. They really don't go past 7, except for a very, very small amount of them. So Pirate's Pillage just really sets you up when you're maybe behind on lands. It's just a beautiful card in EDH, and basically any deck that isn't green, or basically any deck that can run this that isn't green, I'd say should. I will go on record saying this is an absurd card and should definitely be played. Maybe not blue, but if you're black, red, white, you know, mono red, or red, white, I'd still even play it in Izzet. It's just a lot of fun. And then we have Mind's Eye. We need to draw extra cards. It's pretty easy to leave open mana. It's pretty easy to have too much mana. You can just draw an absurd amount of cards off of this. And then we have our two other Planeswalkers, besides Koth. Tybalt, draw a card. His plus is draw a card and discard a card at random at 2. I can't tell you how many times I've played a Tybalt and then just let the game run from there. Even if all I'm doing is just drawing and pitching at random, it's a good time. And it's definitely not, it's definitely works well with our deck. It's not the worst. And we kind of see way more cards. As long as you play a little strategically around it, you'll be fine. He can also -4 to zap somebody equal to the number of cards in your hand. That's not the relevant part, but it comes up occasionally. Maybe somebody drew too many cards, got greedy, and forgot about them. But it's really about that -6. If you can get to -6, you gain control of all creatures until end of turn. You Insurrection. Gain control of all creatures until end of turn. Untap them, they gain haste, and you can swing at people. Let's bring it over here. Let me show you these two guys. So we have, here's Tybalt. I wonder if anyone can see this. I wonder if it's too small. Try and zoom in a little bit. Hopefully this isn't completely pointless and you guys haven't been able to see this accurately on screen. But Tybalt is right there. He's just a 2-drop, so it's really not the worst if you can't... even if you just drop him and draw a card, discard a card, it's not the end of the world. If you get to do him twice, he's already kind of done his job. And most of the time, your opponents will not take the time to attack him. It's just not worth it. They'll forget about him. He's notoriously bad, and I love him. My buddy Pete, that you've seen commenting, is also the world's biggest Tybalt fan. And he's still got a foil one he owes me. It's the only Planeswalker I don't have foil in this deck. Next is Chandra Flamecaller. This is my favorite Planeswalker of all... It's between this and the Amonkhet Nicobolas, but probably Flamecaller overall. She can create 2 elementals and swing. Not an irrelevant amount of damage in EDH. They're 3/1s, and it's just It's just solid for picking on somebody. But the real kicker is this 0. Discard all the cards in your hand, then draw that many cards +1. It's absurd. Foil Russian. I don't have any other foreign cards, but I will run Tybalt. My only problem with making him Russian is actually people don't know what he does. Like, nobody actually knows what he does. But I will take it. I'd love a foil Russian one. I gotta get back to this because this is almost ready. But then you can also wipe the board for any amount she currently has. Just -X and zap that many creatures. It doesn't come up too often you're going to be doing that. Most of the time you're either plussing or zeroing. But if you have to -X, it's there and it's awesome. I love Chandra. And so last but not least, we're going to quickly go over the, because we've hit a minute 15, or an hour 15. But, what am I doing? We're going to go over to here. And we're just going to talk about the ramp cards. They're pretty straightforward. We've got Generator Servant. He can sacrifice him. He's a 2-drop 2/1 that can sacrifice himself to add 2 mana to your mana pool. If you use a creature with it, it gains haste. Ramping into a creature and getting haste, and also being able to use him to kind of stockpile mana before the end of somebody's turn, and then opening with this guy is a great strategy. He's just... this is the kind of ramp we can sometimes need, and it's not a bad card to have. Burnished Heart is way better. This card, Explosive Vegetation's in a color that should not be able to by any means. Samson Rackham, again, we get to ramp, and when it dies, we draw a card, which is pretty relevant with Feldon. Neheb I'll go over later. He's worth talking about in some kind of long-term, or he's worth talking about in length later. Mana Crypt, obviously just add 2 colors for 0. Soul Ring. Mind Stone. We play Extra Planar Lens as one of our doublers. When it enters battlefield, you exile a land. Then whenever that land is used, whenever that land is tapped for mana, you add any color, or an extra color of the type it produced. We run basic mountains in this deck. Feel free to go get yourself some snow-colored. They're pretty expensive now due to Scred Red in Modern. I also want to get all of my lands this art. This is one of my favorite arts in the game, and definitely my favorite mountain. One day, when I get real close to finish foiling this out, I'm going to get like 32 foil of this, and it's going to suck. It's going to be like $300, but I'm going to do it, and I'm going to hate myself, and I'm going to love it. But feel free to use your snow covereds to mess up other people. I don't particularly care. Most of the time when we've dropped an Extra Planar Lens, it's not just ramp. It's actually killing our opponents so much faster than any amount of extra lands they could probably deal with help them out. Ooh. Alright, I'm running low on battery, so I really got to get this moving. I should have brought my charger, but I'm not going to keep this going. 3/9 ammo, taps for 3 colorless. Gauntlet of Might is all red creatures gain +1/+1 and all mountains tap for double. This card's really expensive, and now even more since the buyouts. I'm sorry if you really wanted to play mono red and didn't get one, but you're going to survive without it. I promise you. There are plenty of other cards that do that. No, there aren't. I'm going to be honest with you. Gauntlet of Might is really important and allows you to play... allows you to be a lot more loosey-goosey with how many fire breathers you can run, but just having the amount that you get, like having the extra relevancy is just awesome. I'm gonna turn down brightness on my computer. Hopefully I can save some time. But it's an awesome card. If you have one, run it. If you don't, ask if your friends can proxy it, because it's really important. Unfortunately, it's on the reserve list, and I can't ever print it again. But they can maybe do another version of Gauntlet of Power, which does the same thing, except you get to pick the color and just cost 5 instead. It's really not a huge deal. Oh, run Cage Sun. Duh. I don't run Cage Sun. I think it's a little too expensive for what it does. I don't care about the buff. I get to run Gauntlet of Might over it. Oh, just go run Cage Sun. Write that down and just buy one for like $3 and save yourself like 200%. Next is Koth of the Hammer. I've already kind of explained him. He's really only relevant for his minus, so you might as well call him a ritual, but he's the most powerful ritual in mono red, for sure. And then we have Gilded Lotus, taps for 3 mana of any color. Last card I'm going to talk about here, before I cut this off, is... actually, no, it's all worth it. I'll be fine. Last card I'm going to talk about here is Nahib, the Eternal. He's worth talking about because he is a really cool strategy for this deck. I know my battery's running low. Shut up. He is a 5-drop 4/6, which is, wow, I didn't realize he was that big. A flick 3, that doesn't really matter. But whenever he becomes blocked, they're going to lose 3 life. So they kind of can't avoid taking damage. But the awesome part is at the beginning of your post-combat main phase, so right after your combat, you're going to get an amount of mana equal to the amount of life lost by opponents so far this turn. So you can get an absurd boost in life. And especially if you can throw in... this guy's awesome with extra combat steps. He's awesome with all the fire breathers because you kind of get to pay mana into the fire breather, hit somebody with him, and then you get all that mana, all that return on investment. And he's just really fucking fun to play with, especially with things like, especially with some of the bigger ones like Emrakul and stuff. You'll get an absurd amount of mana, drop your whole hand, Wheel of Fortune, and then just start again. It's a lot of fun, and he is definitely one of the cooler cards I'm sad I haven't gotten to play enough in this deck. And that's about it. This is my Feldon deck. It's my baby. Let's switch back over to the camera as we cut out here. I've been playing this deck pretty much since he came out. I tried playing Deretti for a little bit and got really bored with it because artifacts are boring. I just wanted to hit people with fire breathers again, like I used to when I was a kid, and or at least when I used to when I was a lot younger and I first got into EDH. One of my first EDH decks was Jaya, and I remember playing Shivan Dragon in there. So I kind of went back to it, and I've had so much fun with it. I've been willing to put in all the extra time and effort to collect all these masterpieces, foil out the whole deck. Pretty much the only thing that isn't is the lands and a couple of expensive new cards. Gauntlet of Might can't be foil, but the rest of it I've worked pretty hard to make sure is. It's my baby. It's definitely one of my best performing decks I've ever made. Almost every time I play it, I come in a close second, if not first, because it's just capable of dishing out so much damage. And believe me when I tell you that this is probably the most fun you'll have playing Magic if you like Red, especially in EDH. I've brought this to stores and let some of my close friends play it, and they've just had a smile on their face the whole time while they read what the fuck these cards do that they've never seen before. I really can't stress it enough. This is definitely one of my favorites, and I'm glad, I'm happy you guys have tuned in to watch, and I hope you guys really enjoy learning about this deck, and hope you want to build your own. It's really not that expensive either. I'm playing a lot of the really, really top tier cards and really expensive versions of said cards. You don't really need Mana Crypt, Gauntlet of Might, or Wheel of Fortune. You can kind of get away. There's so many cheap alternatives to these cards, and it really doesn't pull back that far from the strategy. I just treat it that way because it's my baby and I want it to be as powerful as possible, mostly because it's kind of a meme. Mono red is always kind of at a disadvantage, so I don't feel bad about putting a Mana Crypt in a deck that's supposed to be fun. But if you want to get a leg up on your opponents, go out and get a Blood Crypt and a Blood Moon and a Magus of the Moon, a couple of cheap alternatives to the ramp cards, and you'll have just as much fun as I have. It's really not that expensive. I think the cheapest version is like maybe $200, $300, which is not that bad for the amount of fun you're going to be having. that's all I've got to say about it. I wish I had a little bit more time. I'd love to go over the swag that's in here and really show it off. Everything you see on the tapped out is actually what's in the deck. And so I've got some pretty sweet stuff in here. But enough about that. Enough about me bragging. I hope you've enjoyed this Sleeving Up live stream of Feldon the Third Path, Big Red Reanimator. Hope you'll see me next time. I don't know what deck I'm going to do next, but I think it's going to be probably... I don't want to promise anything, but I think I'm just going to do Jace. That's another really fun deck that... that's actually a pretty quick one. It won't go a minute and... it won't go an hour and 20 minutes for sure. He's a lot of fun. He's my dedicated combo deck. And I'll see you guys next time and show you how Adam from Double A Gaming runs combo. Oh, we have another watcher. Sorry, man. It's just ending, but I'll have the whole thing up, and I'll have this edited with a thumbnail. The link to my tapped out is in the description, so you can see the whole deck. For once, I've actually put the whole deck together on tapped out, and it's exactly what it looks like in paper on there. I should be doing that for my other decks. I'm terrible, and I apologize. But feel free to go look through there if you don't feel like watching an hour and 20 minutes of video. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you guys next time.